Welcome to the program. Today we're covering the servicing of the brakes on this Silver Cloud. This job would apply to all Silver Cloud and Bentley S cars. First thing we're going to do is look at the tools we're going to need. So these are the tools we're going to require. We're going to use a hammer to use with the chisel to knock the lock tabs back. We have a soft hammer, a brass hammer, for knocking anything that we need some persuasion. A couple of pairs of channel lock pliers, the larger ones to lift the brake linings or brake shoes from the wheel cylinders, some smaller ones for whatever. We have a vice grip, small pair for pulling out clevis pins, a large screwdriver for levering off hubcaps, a slightly smaller screwdriver for perhaps tight brake drum screws, and a couple of screwdrivers for hose clamps on the master cylinders. Have a chisel for knocking back the lock tabs at the stub axle, and a pin punch for pushing out the clevis pin. We've got a selection of long wrenches, 9/16, ½ inch and 7/16. These are going to be used for taking down the master cylinders. We have a long 11/32. We'll use this for the bolts, for the servo if they're perhaps tight. And we've got a couple of line wrenches. These wrenches are somewhat thicker, you can see, and they work well on the fittings so that we don't round off our fittings. They have a couple of short 9/16 and ½ inch and 7/16. The 9/16 and ½ inch we'll use on the master cylinder on the other end of the bolts because they're nuts and bolts. A 7/16 wrench will be used for the fittings on the master cylinder and also the bleed nipple and the line that goes into the rear wheel cylinder. I have a little specialty 7/16 wrench for perhaps that awkward fitting that we'll need a short one that's just too tight for our fingers, and a small 11/32 which happens to fit the 2BA bolts on the servo. And of course we've got a pair of side cutters for the split pins that hold the clevis pins in. We've got a 13/16 socket for undoing the wheel nuts, and we've got a couple of ratchets and some sockets. We've got a quarter drive ratchet that we'll use for undoing the bolt on the rear wheel cylinder, a 7/16 for the bleed nipple on the rear wheel cylinder, and also we've got a 9/16 socket and ratchet for undoing the on-stop on the servo. And of course we've got an impact gun for undoing the bolts that hold the backing plate to the stub axle, and with that we're going to use the flex socket. And they're the tools we're going to need. We're going to check a few items and then we're going to service the brakes. You can see that these brake hoses are old. The cross hatching on the brake hoses means they're more than 10 years old and we'll need to change these. I'm going to take the screws out of the drum, but you can see that one is missing, so we'll take the other two out and we'll remove the drum. Once you've got the screws removed, we're going to try and pull the drum off. What happens to these studs is they get pulled in. You can see how tight they are on one side. So a quick jerk will pull them off. You can see that these brake linings have been bonded on, which is incorrect. They should be riveted on. You can see that they've stressed up and they've cracked right through there. You can see all those heat cracks building up. You can see that the shoe isn't hitting the drum properly there. So we'll take the shoes off. It's a little difficult to take these shoes off. You have to do them in the right order. Pull them out of the bottom half of the wheel cylinder. You've got a peg for the self-adjusting there. You slip them off there. Take the shoe off and you have to rotate it around like that. You can see that. Now we can see that the cracks going across the shoe, which is a heat build-up. The problem is with these is they're bonded. These shoes should be riveted on. The linings are too long. You can see that they've extended way beyond the need, or way beyond where the rivet holes are, which is more lining than is needed. So we're going to put the correct linings on. You can, I just pulled the shoe off there, and you can see that the brake fluid has oozed out of that wheel cylinder there. So we now know that we're going to be rebuilding the wheel cylinder. You can see that there, all the fluid has leaked out of there. So we've found a number of problems in just that step. So what we'll need to do, because of this rust build up and all of this, is we'll probably have to change these wheel cylinders. We'll use the re-sleeve wheel cylinders and we'll change them, but to do that we have to remove the backing plate from the stub axle, and this will help us at that time. We'll change the hoses as well. So we're going to take this cap off here like so. There's a split pin or a cotter pin in there, need to bend. Pull that out of there. And then we'll take the nut off. You can see that the nut is left-handed. I'm going clockwise and the nut is coming off. All the Rolls-Royce nuts on this side of the car are left-handed on spinning surfaces, so that they tighten up, not undo as they're spinning. Sometimes you'll get a car where they've mixed up the stub axles and you'll find they're back to front over there, but this car's correct, like that. So we've slipped it off. We've got a spacer washer there. These are the wheel bearings. Take the time to repack those before we put them on. You can see they're very beefy and meaty. They don't generally cause a problem on these cars. The next step is to undo these bolts around the stub axle. It's got a lock tab which we're going to bend back. Now we're ready to remove these bolts, but before I do that I'm going to release the hoses, so that when I've released the bolts I can take it right off to the floor. So we're going to remove the pipes completely, the hoses, the brake hoses. The reason for this is because the hoses break down inside. These hoses block up, the inside collapses, and they act like a one-way valve. The pressure from the master cylinder pushes right through the hose, but the pressure of the spring pushing the fluid back isn't enough to get it through the hose. So as these hoses age, it's necessary to change them, and we do this about every 10 years. If you don't change them, what can happen is that the front brakes can go on fire, or so can the rears for that matter. Be very careful with these pipes that you don't, if these are rusted to the nut and you turn them, you're going to break them off. You need to be a little bit careful. And you notice I removed the lock nut. That allows the hose to go away from the fitting and makes it easier to come off. You can see that hose is now out of the fitting. I haven't bent the pipe or this out the way, so that it's still going to be as easy to join up when we're finished. Take that end out. So we're going to take the inside fitting off the hose, wind that through. We're going to let the lock nut that holds the hose to the bracket off. Use the scissor action again. Be careful when you're flicking this stuff around. You've got to remember this is brake fluid, and it's going to take the paint off the fender, so you've got to be a little bit careful of that. And we repeat the process on this other side. Then I'm holding the hose there. You can see my action, and I pull up around. That gives us a So I'll loosen that till it goes tight, then I'll loosen the lock nut. There. As I said earlier, that gives us some clearance. You can see everything starts to free up there. There, so now we've got the inside one again. The lock nut's tight where the pipe's gone rusty over the years. Once we get it down to where the fitting is, it'll free off a bit. So we're going to remove the 6 bolts that hold the backing plate to the stub axle. So now we pull the backing plate right off, as you can see, and we're ready to take that to the bench and overhaul it. So we're at the left rear wheel. We'll notice that another screw is missing, just as it was in the front. We're going to remove these 2 screws and remove the drum, and we'll have a look what's going on inside. Then we're going to strike the axle, the half shaft at this point, and put our fingers behind the drum. The drum is made up of the base and then some cooling fins. If you strike on the cooling fins, you're going to break them off. So what we're going to do is we're going to aim our shot there, or at very least at the end of the drum, at the end of the studs. So a nice sharp crack, pulled it. Pull the drum off. You can see the linings there. These linings are riveted, so they're better than the fronts. Probably a little low on this side. So what we need to do is we need to remove this spring. This spring is a pullback spring there. We're going to remove it there, then we're going to pull it off there. So we're going to remove this pull-off spring here. There, this is hooked through a hook at the back, and we pull the shoe slightly forward. It's been a little bit awkward, but there you go. Managed to pull that out. You can see that hook there. This goes in the clip, that goes in the shoe. The hook and the spring goes down in there. So we're going to remove the shoes. I'm going to use a screwdriver, lift up on this one, pull that out of there, and use the screwdriver again. We've got a bit of seizure on this here, which is making it a little bit awkward. We knock that down there, we pull that. Now what we have to do with these shoes is we have to twist them around, and we've got, as I say, we've got some seizure, which isn't making it any easier. We have to pull that around, and you can see that stud. Well, there's a nut on the back of that, so we're going to turn that around to there and try and get this out of here. The expander for the handbrake is there, so we push that in a bit, and that allowed us to take the shoes out. You can see that the shoe is thicker at this point than this, so the shoe hasn't worn evenly. It's very uneven in its wear, so we're going to change these linings and shoes. You can see that this one here is better, but it's still in a little bit of a distressed state, so we're going to change this out. You can see on this wheel cylinder that this has some very peculiar rubbers. These are not correct at all, so we'll change those. And you can see there that this is showing signs of leaking, so we're going to change this. We're going to use the brass lined things. You can see both pistons are rusting up, so we're going to put another wheel cylinder on with a brass liner in it. We've got seizure here. This is seized up solid, which doesn't allow you to adjust the brake, and if you forced this adjuster out, of course it would lock the brake up solid. So the next step is to remove the brake line from the back of this wheel cylinder, and take off the compensator rod that joins to this expander. This expander is for the initial pressure when you put your foot on the brake initially. What happens is the rods come out and push the linings out to the drum, and then the servo takes over and pushes the wheel cylinder out. But we'll cover more of that as we go along. To remove the wheel cylinder, we're going to have to undo the pipe, the compensator rod, and take the bleed nipple out. We're going to take the compensator rod spring off, and we'll do that first. Take the spring. There's a couple of S's. You can see those S's there. They should have 2 on each end of the compensator rod where they join the drum. Take the dust poop, pull that back. Again, as we did with the front, we're going to be very careful undoing everything, and it's always worth just doing it up a little bit first to free it up before you try and undo it. So we'll take the nipple out. The nipple's at an angle and it won't come through the slot that's provided for it, so we have to take it right out. So we're going to take the nipple out. And we're going to take the pipe out. See, we're a little tight, so I wiggle it back and forth. Break the rust free of the pipe without breaking the pipe. Okay, so now we've got the brake pipe out of the cylinder. We're going to take the cotter pin or split pin out of the compensator rod there. So that frees up the compensator rod. So we're left with one 2BA nut. Going to take off. There is actually a lock tab on there, but it was so rusted I couldn't see it. So what I did was I tapped the socket on to allow me to undo the bolt. So we take the 2BA bolt. You can see the lock tab there that I had to bend over. It was covered in crud. So that frees up the wheel cylinder. I'm going to give it a little tap just to encourage it to come out. You can see that there. There's a rubber gasket that you don't want to tear. So we'll take a screwdriver and we'll just poke that there. And you can see that wheel cylinder has now come out. You've got the bleed nipple hole and the line hole and the bolt hole, and there's the compensator. So take off the other side in exactly the same way, then we're ready to go to the bench and rebuild them. So we're underneath the car at the master cylinder now, and we're going to remove the 2 hoses that feed the fluid from the reservoir. So I'm going to undo the hose clamps, and I'm going to ease the hoses off and then loosen off the high pressure pipes. So we undo the clamp. Take the time while it's stuck to the hose to undo it as much as you need to. Push the rubber hose out of the way. So we're going to remove the clamp on the top hose by undoing the clip. Loosen off the 2 fittings, 2 pipe fittings for the high pressure pipes on top, and then we're going to the other side to remove the plate. Remove the bolt that holds the fork for the main shaft on the arms of the master cylinder. remove the bolt from the top of the handbrake lever, so 7/16. And then pull the shaft off there. We're now going to remove the bolts through the master cylinder, the 2 5/16 or half-inch wrench size and the 2 9/16 wrench size, which are 3/8 bolts. Going to remove the 2 bolts from this end and the 2 bolts from there, and that will allow us to take the plate off. We also have to remove the shaft, or the bolt with the shaft on it, for the handbrake lever, which is exactly the same. And then we'll be ready to drop the master cylinders. So we're going to remove the last bolt that's holding the plate, which is the top one, which is the shaft for the handbrake lever. We've got to watch as we take it down, have to come off the thing. We pull that out and you'll notice inside there you can see the spacer, the bolt. Then we're going to take the side plate off the shaft, take that down, and that exposes the master cylinders. What we're left with is the spring on here. Take down, remove the fittings from the master cylinder. Just keep going until you get the fitting out. Watch yourself as you take it off. You can let that master cylinder drop down. And then we'll do the other one. When you've removed the fittings from the master cylinder, you can lift them down. We're now looking at the master cylinder assembly underneath the Silver Cloud 2. This is the handbrake linkage, and this is the linkage that goes to the servo. We're going to drop the handbrake cable and the servo linkage at this point, and then proceed to the servo and drop the rest of the linkage. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the spring. This spring has been put in the wrong spot and it's going to be a little bit difficult to get down, but we've forced it down. The spring should be in this hole there. That would be the correct place for the spring. So when we assemble it, we will do that. We take the spring off. This makes it free for us at this stage to pull the cotter pin from the handbrake. Push the clevis pin out. That frees up the handbrake cable. We're going to send this all the way to the front to take it out of the way. We'll wrap it around this gear shift linkage here, just to keep it out of our way. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to remove the bolts from the servo to the master cylinder. Take the bolt out. These are special bolts, keep the nut together. And then also have some spacers. Take off the rod. That one. Take this part out. That relieves the 2 rods. We're now going to have to remove them from the servo end. To do this, we have a 2BA bolt, which we undo. Take the bolt out. This leaves us a horseshoe or clip there. That out. And then we take a clevis pin out. This is nice and free, greased up. And remove one rod. This one here is a little different, and this is for the reverse. This is so when the car's going backwards, this can float over a little more. I'll take 2 bolts out of there. So when we get this bolt out, I'd like you to take note of the way this clip is on. You can see that that clip has a leg that goes over there. You take this pin out of here, which will free us up, and you can see that this shape of this linkage, you have a bar there, and this is open. And we'll take this out. They're the 2 activating rods. They go to the master cylinder and pull it on and off for reverse. We have 2 more rods up higher. There we have to take out. So we're going to remove the bolt from the brake pedal rod. We just loosen it with the wrench, and then we should be able to get it out with our fingers. Take the clip out. Make the clevis pin come out. Like so. That releases that. Then we just have the rod to the compensator. Take the bolt and the clip. Allows us to take the pin out of there, and that frees up the 2 servo arms. This bracket here is if the rod at the back should break or a pin be left out, this lever can go forwards, hit that, and cause the servo to still work. It would give you a very low pedal, but that is a safety feature that you must remember to put back up. That's the on-stop lever. Oops. Take the bolt out. This will allow you to turn the on-stop, and that will allow us to turn the servo down there. That leaves us 1 more bolt, which is on the end of the servo. Loosen the bolt off, like so. Once the bolt's out, pull it out. It has to stay in the linkage or the inside the tube. Now we need to pull the servo off. You can see that this servo is a lot of movement and loose. So we'll give that a bit of a thump there. Everything was a bit tight. And that's the servo out of there. The first thing we're going to strip apart is the backing plate off the front axle, and we're going to remove the 2 pipes, take the nipples out and undo the screws. You can see the movement we've got there, just that the fitting is just about seized to the pipe, so we'll move that back and forth till we get that all the way round. It doesn't cause us a problem. Oh, it's going to cause us a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift that up like so, and I'm going to wind that around so that I can get it into the vise and free that up. I didn't distort the pipe too much, but I don't want to risk losing the pipe. So that's that one. This one's free. You can see that's going round and round. that one. So now we'll take our nipples out. There's a ball inside the hole and a depression on the nipple, and the nipple squeezes the ball into the fitting. If this was clean, you could see that there's a hole there that comes past the ball, and that's how the bleeder works. So you don't want to lose the ball. You've got to keep your eye on that and where that's going. You can see that other one in there. I'm going to use a magnet and draw the ball out of the hole so that I don't lose it. You can see the ball there. Put that to one side. Do the same on the other one. Pull the ball out. You can see that there. Put that to one side. Then I'm going to remove the screws, the back of the wheel cylinder. Same on this side. Now we're faced with removing these screws. On the other side there's nuts which are easier to remove. So we'll turn that over. You can see there and there all the nuts. We'll take our 1132. Undo that. What I'm doing here is I'm making it easy for myself because I'm letting the rust and the crud hold the screw while I undo it. If they do come loose, I've got to go to both sides and hold the screw, so I'm using that, I hope, to an advantage. When you've got the last nut off, you can lift off the grease catcher, and then the backing plate is separated away from the cylinder holder. Take the springs off, and now we're ready to release the wheel cylinders away from the plate. So now we're going to remove the big nuts and the half-inch nuts to let the cylinders off the plate. Take that bolt out. You can see there's a star washer on there. And we'll take the other one out. Take our soft hammer. Tap one bolt out. Tap the other one out. Now you'll notice there's a shaft that goes through there, and what that does is it picks up on the edge of this plate. So you have to be particularly careful because there's a good amount of seizure around here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take the soft hammer and knock that off. And you can see in there that that pin picks up on that side. So you can't go banging it either way, you have to go straight off. So we'll do the other side. Like so. Now we're going to take the piston out. And we'll push the cup in. You can see the rust and the build up on that rubber cup there, and the spreader, and the spring. You can also see the state of the wall of the wheel cylinder and the amount of crud that's in the bottom. Take the other one. You can see that that was leaking well and truly. Pull that. You can see there's build-up of rust there. You can also see all the rust inside that wheel cylinder. So these wheel cylinders need sleeving. What we'll do is we'll give them a good clean up, blast, send them out for CAD plating, and then send them out to have the brass sleeves put in. When we assemble this unit, we'll be using different wheel cylinders, but all this will be saved and recycled for another car. We're going to put together the backing piece for the wheel cylinders. We need to make sure that we get everything in there. We've got a spacer with a cutout. This cutout fits onto that part there and stops some of the movement. So we're going to put this through here first. Then we're going to offer up the wheel cylinder to the plate. We're going to rotate the spacer. You can see there that I've now made the hole line up. We take our special shouldered bolts, we offer that through. I'm going to turn that over and show you what that looks like. You've got your spacer and you've got your shouldered bolt. Put the nut on there to hold it. We've got a 5/16 bolt that goes in through the back. Got some shake-proof washers again. Put our nut on there. So you can see that there. So we'll do the same on the other side. So we're going to tighten that up now. But just before we do that, these are the pins for the brake shoes. These are the pins that the self-adjusters go onto, and these do serve two purposes. You can adjust these in and out of this plate, and what that does is it keeps the brake shoe parallel to the drum. By pushing on this, the shoe can rotate like that, which keeps the lining flat to the drum, and we'll go over that a bit later on. You can see on this one I've got the lock nut on already. The lock nut goes in, and that of course is how you make them tight so they don't move. Like so. Well, we will adjust those, we need to adjust those, but we'll leave that in for now. Okay, so we're ready to go on to assemble the rest of it. So I've tightened up this cylinder, and I'm just going to tighten this one up. Like so. And the 5/16. So that's tight. We're now ready to fit the backing plate to the wheel cylinder plate. Okay. When you offer the wheel cylinder adapter plate to the backing plate, you may have difficulty lining up these holes for the screws. What causes this are these bolt heads on there. If they're not in line around, they will cause it to be pushed off one way or the other. So you may very well need to loosen off these two bolts, turn them around until they follow the circle, as it were, And you can see that those holes now line up, and we're ready to put the screws in. Of course, we have to tighten this up because we can't get the wrench back in there. And we'll take a second and we'll just nip those up. You can see now the holes are all lined up, and we can put the screws through and the grease catcher on. So we're going to turn this over. We're just going to nip the bolts up without allowing the heads to turn. We'll keep our eye on that. Making sure that head stays in line with that circle, the imaginary circle. At this stage we're going to put the pull back springs for the front shoes in like so. You can't put the springs in after the fact, so you must do it at this stage before you screw the plate to the backing plate, because once that's on there you cannot get the springs in or out, so it's important to do that. Okay, we'll put our gasket on. You've got to be sure you get it right, because the holes will not line up at every point. The cutouts give you a guide. There's a couple of cutouts there, but it can still go on. It can only go on one way, and it's somewhat mastered, so you've got to make sure you get that lined up. The same with the grease catcher. The grease catcher has multi-holes. You've got to make sure you line that up. Then we can start putting the screws in. Wiggle it around. I tend to do a bit of a pattern, a crisscross pattern. Let it float around till you get them all started. Once you've got them all in, I'm going to turn it over. Now you can see the back side of the wheel cylinder, and we're going to put the screws in. We can tighten these ones up because everything's now aligned. We nip those up. And then we're going to turn it over and tighten up the these nuts. When you've got them all tightened, we'll just whip round them, make sure we caught them all. We're ready to put new rubbers into the wheel cylinders. We're going to put new rubbers in them. We're going to drop the expander in first, and take our rubber cup, take a little bit of rubber grease just around the edge to give us some lubrication. Makes it slide in nice and easily. To push the lip down. I'm going to take our piston, push that in. The spring's pretty good, but once you get this cap on, everything should stay together. Just watch the lip, make sure it's down inside behind the lug there. Now we're going to do the other side. And there, that's the two wheel cylinders built. We're now going to go to the back. We're going to put the pipes on. Remember we took the pipes out. We'll put that in. I'm going to have to bend the pipe down to show you how to do that. So I'm going to take it and nip it up like so, and then I'm just going to ease it there. This is the point that we bent it at, so we're going to push it down, and then the hose will pick up there. So we have to make a decision at this point whether we put the thing in there or in there, but there is no decision because the bleed nipple always wants to be to the top. The air is going to float to the top in the cylinder, so we know that that's going to be our bleed nipple hole. So we're going to put that in the bottom. So we're ready to put our nipples in. So we're going to get our balls. We're just going to drop the ball into the hole like so. You can see that that went and sat in the bottom of the taper. And we're going to put the nipple in. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm just going to nip them up because once we put fluid into them, the fluid could come and start to drip down. So we just nip them. We'll have to undo them to bleed them anyway. We're going to put the hoses on the backing plate to make it easy for you to see. We're going to put the hose through the bracket and a flat washer, and we use a half nut. I'm going to wind that on to the hose. I'm not going to tighten this lock nut up at all. I'm going to offer it, wind it in until I can get this fitting to start on the hose. You can see I've got plenty of movement there, which gives me a good, it allows me to angle it to the right angle to make it join onto the hose. The last thing you need to do is to cross thread the fitting to the hose, so that does that. Also allows you to wind it up with your fingers because you're not pulling it against one another. We'll do the same with this one. And that's the easiest way to do that. I then tighten the lock nut for the hose, and then I can tighten the pipe fitting, and that makes it ready to put onto the car. Sometimes you're going to find these things are really rusted up, and you may very well have to use some penetrating oil or some heat, but you're going to have to make that decision on each job as you do them. So we're going to take these studs out of here. The nuts and the studs are all coming together, so before we can send these out we'd have to strip them all apart. This is the expander for the handbrake and for the initial press with the foot. What happens, as I explained earlier, is this pulls out of here, which pushes the shoes up against the drum for the initial press. And how they do this, I'll show you in a moment. What happens is the movement of these rollers and these sliders cause the expanders to slide up, and that's what gives you the push, and that's also what gives you your brake feel. That's the only feel with this braking system that you have, is this expander pushing the drums against the, or the shoes I should say, against the drums. So we're going to get that all cleaned up and cadded. So I'm going to push this out to show you what's inside. There's a cup and there's a expander. You can see that expander is broken, so we'll need to replace that. And then another rubber cup. You can see the condition of the cup is pretty poor, and also the wall inside the cylinder is very rusty, and of course that needs re-sleeving also. Because we're changing the rear wheel cylinder to a new sleeved one, We're going to have to put studs into it. To do this, we're going to use a couple of nuts. You can use a stud removing tool if you have one, but if you don't have one, the best way to get the nuts out or in, or the studs in or out, is to use a couple of nuts. We're going to put 2 on there. We're going to take 2 wrenches. We're going to lock the 2 nuts together, like so. That's squeeze them onto the thread at that end, and then we're just going to wind them like so. We hold the bottom nut, then we can take that off, and we'll do all 4 the same. We'll just go right the way through. Take your 2 nuts off. Now the cylinder's got the studs in it, and we're going to assemble the expander device. The plate goes on like so. This is how the expander works. The pull on the rod sends the 2 pieces which push the shoe against the drum. See how free that is, how that works. What we're going to do is we're going to put a bit of anti-seize grease in there. This can get full of water, so you want to put plenty of grease around so that it doesn't seize up. Lay that in there like so. Have to hold it like that. And pick that up like so. So now we're ready to put in our spacers. Slide them down inside. You can see that the holes are somewhat bigger than the spacers. This allows everything to move around. You can see that movement there. And what that does is it allows the shoes to centralize inside the drum. Nothing is forced into a position that it doesn't want to go into. You can see that that movement there allows the shoes all to centralize, which is the principle of the compensator rod and everything inside the drum. So we're going to put a washer on there. You can see that that washer's got a small bevel on one side, and the bevel wants to be up. And then we're going to put a couple of internal tooth locking washers. These go on there. They give you a lock without any fullness. A spring washer is too full, so it keeps the height down. We'll tighten these up, and you'll see that because of the spacers in there, this can still float. What we call fully floating. The cadmium, of course, is going to stop the rust, and the grease is going to keep it lubricated. And so, you can see that that's ready to go. This part's ready to go on. So we're now ready to put the hydraulic part into the wheel cylinder, the rubber cups and the expander and the piston. The first thing I do is I take a bit of rubber grease. This comes with the hydraulic parts, the kits, the rubber parts. Spread a bit around there, and I just slip it into the end and I push it all the way in. We're going to put the expander in next. We drop that in like so. We take our other cup. Have to put that in the opposite way round. You've got the indent, and then we're going to stick that in like so. You can just push it down a bit with the piston. So now we've got the cup there and the cup there. So we need to spread the covers, the dust covers, over the piston, and we're going to do that just like so. I'm going to pop that in. I'm going to push that over the lip there. Do the same on this one. Put a bit of lubrication, this rubber grease. Only use rubber grease, don't use any other type of grease because it'll affect the neoprene cups. Spread that like so. And then that's the wheel cylinder ready to go onto the backing plate on the car. There's a couple of things to take note of on these brake shoes before we take them apart. The way this is set up, this was on the left rear, and the way this is set up is they have a short lining on this side shoe and a short lining on there. The direction of rotation on this shoe is around this way. How they should be set up is the short lining should be here and here. The lining does not go to the end of the shoe. This is the short end, as I call it, there. It should be, the short end of the lining should be there, so the lining would stop at this point there, be short as it is there, and long there. At this point, we're going to take the linkage off the shoes and the self-adjuster off the shoes. I am going to put freshly cadded shoes on here with new linings, so all I'm doing is taking the linkage off to keep it for another day. So I'm going to take it off this shoe at this point and this shoe at that point, and just leave it together. We'll put it in the glass beater or clean it up. We'll degrease it first, put it in the glass beater, and then send it off for CAD. Cadmium's not just to make it look pretty, of course. It keeps the rust away and stops it deteriorating. So it's a good way of assuring the proper function, because the seizure doesn't occur. Take a punch and a hammer. Tap them out. So you can see the pins are somewhat corroded, so we're very tight in there. And again, like the front ones, we roll it to take the spring out. There's the linkage. Now we're going to take the self-adjuster off. I'm going to hold this piece in the vise and undo this nut. I'm going to bang the piece out here. You can see that that's rusty, and by CAD plating everything, that'll give that a good surface. This is never lubricated because this works on a friction. As the two washers grip the shoe and the shoe wears, it goes out and holds it there so that the cylinder isn't pushed back each time and the travel is increased. So the piston pushes the shoe out. As it wears, this slides up like so, and that's how the self-adjuster works. Have to be particularly careful with the spring because this is a high heat area and these springs shrink. You can see that that spring looks somewhat closed up, almost spring-bound. So I'll show you a new one when we put it together, and you'll probably see it's considerably longer, and we'll change those springs. We're going to do the same with the front shoes. You can see that was considerably easier because it wasn't rusty. And that shoe is the same idea. The washer grips as the pressure from the wheel cylinder pushes the shoe closer to the drum. The thing slides, grips, and that saves travel each time. So that's a self-adjuster. We can now take these off, take the split pin out of those because we are changing the shoes. Because these are bonded, we'll need to take these off, clean them up, and get them CAD plated and ready to go. But one of the things you'll need to do is to be particularly careful when you're taking your shoes off that there's no cracks here. Quite often these shoes crack here and they lose their strength, so then they tend to bow out. So if the crack is there, I'm afraid you need new shoes. If your shoes are in good shape and you're just going to replace the linings, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to take the linings off the shoes. I'm just drilling the heads of the rivets off. I'm not going into the steel at all. I'm just making the rivet thin enough that I can bang them off. Now take it to the vise, give me some support. Put a pin punch in the middle. Tap it through. When you've got all the rivets out, you can part the lining and the shoe, and the shoe is now ready to fit a new lining to. When fitting the brake linings to the rear shoes, it's important to put them on in the right position. The shoes are not standard one way. As we discussed when we were stripping everything apart, the leading edge of the shoe has the short side and the trailing edge has the long side of the lining. So this part, this one would be a left rear setup. So you would have a short with a long to the adjuster and then a short end to the adjuster and a long one to the master cylinder. So it's essential that we do two this way and two that way to have a set for the rear shoes of the car. You see the shoes come in such a way that they're pre-drilled for both setups. So it's important that you have in your mind set the shoes for the correct position of the lining. We're going to mount this lining to the shoe, and to do that we're going to align the holes and put some rivets through. Some of the linings take a little bit of tweaking and pulling around, so it's important to make sure the person who drilled the shoe actually did it, that the lining will go on. So we're going to put all the rivets in and then we're going to start to rivet them over. You can do this quite easily at home. You don't need any special equipment to do it, except it is a good idea to have a rivet set. Rivet set makes a nice round top to the rivet and makes it very tight. So you put all the rivets in, give it a bit of a wiggle, push the rivets home. So now we're confident that the drilling of that lining and shoe are correct. You can see perhaps down there that there's a slight gap. So now we need to make sure that there is no gap, because the heat transfers from the lining into the shoe and then away through the axle. So we're going to take a couple of vice grips and that way. We have to tip it over the lining and the shoe arrangement and put it on a pin punch in the vise and then hit it. Well, all the all the rivets will probably fall out except the ones that you're working on, but that doesn't matter because you've achieved the line up of the shoe to the, or the lining to the shoe, I should say. And you can see that that rivet is nicely over. We have no gap at all between the shoe and the lining, and we'll continue on and we'll knock over all of the rivets until that shoe is completely attached to the lining. You'll notice that I've done them all now. All the rivets are riveted over. As I was moving from one rivet to the other, I moved the vice grips along to keep the lining good and tight against the shoe. There's no gap at all between the lining and the shoe, and that lining is now ready to be put on the car. We'll continue on and do the other shoe for this side and the shoes for the other side, and that's how you do all of the shoes. The last thing we're going to do with the shoe before we put it on the car is we're going to put the piece that goes into the wheel cylinder, the pushing device, and with that we're going to put the clevis pin in from the back, like so. It has a washer I'm going to put on. I need to let it sink in behind in the groove there. I don't know if you can see that groove. Split pin through. Just nip that off a bit. Shorten this one. Allow us to bend it up and around. Now we have to put the self-adjuster on there, so we'll go to the vise and drop one of our flat washers. Remember, no lubrication. Put the brake shoe on it. Put another one of our washers on. And we've got the tricky little number with the spring. I've used new springs as I did on the rear. Then we just tighten this down. And that's that. You heard the spring crack. And now that's ready to go onto the car, and we'll do the other 3 front shoes and we'll all be set. You can see the springs that I have here. This is an old one, this is an old one, and this is brand new. The 2 old springs are not as long as the brand new spring, so we're going to change all the springs because the heat has affected them. This is the spring for the self-adjuster, which fits to the bottom shoe on each side at the rear, and on all 4 shoes at the front. It's the same spring, and we're going to change them, but we'll fit this one now to the bottom of the rear shoe. We're going to fit the self-adjusting post to the bottom shoe now, so we make sure that we have the bottom shoe and the post. Put the post in the vise. Then we put a washer on the post. We put the shoe on. Make sure these are clean and grease-free. We don't want any grease on these. These work on friction, and any grease is going to cause them to slide, and you don't want them to slide, you want them to grip. Take a beveled washer on the top, place it on, then we put our nut on. When you get the nut started, you can screw it down, take a wrench, pull it all the way down, and that gives that a good grip. You can see that it takes a fair amount of effort to move that around. and this is what causes the shoe to stay out, and the self-adjusting part. When we've done that, now I'm going to put the compensating linkage on. And what this piece of linkage does is when one shoe moves down, it causes the other shoe to move at the same time. So we'll put this on. Want to use the correct size cotter pin or split pin, keep them nice and tight. The temptation sometimes is to use a smaller one, but you don't want to do that. Then we go to the top shoe. When we fit the linkage to the top shoe, we have to pick the hole. There's 3 holes, and it's actually the 3rd one from the rear of the car. So we'll slide that up through. You use a washer on this, take up some of the clevis pin, and put that in there. You can just trim off the edges so you don't catch on you as you're putting them together. So when we fit the spring, the return spring, to the front of the shoes, we have to decide which hole to put them in. Well, it's this hole here and this one there. Not all the shoes have all the holes, but it's worth remembering it's the second one up away from the adjuster. You'll need to slide the spring in. The spring's quite flexible, so you're able to pull it around a bit. You can see we've got the spring in this hole here, which is the second one up away from the adjuster on both shoes. We've got the one nearest the cylinder on this one, and the 3rd hole on this shoe. A good way of checking this is that this spring, the hook spring, goes from there down, so you know you need to be one away from there. And that's the rear shoes. They're ready now to be put on the car. This is the servo motor. This is what provides the braking system with its power assistance. This is a dry clutch with a cover and 2 levers, but I'm going to take it apart and I'm going to show you how it functions. Take the Jubilee clip off the outside, and then we're going to take the rubber band, and then we have to get this tape off here. Make a start on it, pull it down. Okay. Now, sometimes these servos, what they do is they get covered in oil. You can see this one is pretty dry, although it's dusty and the surface is beginning to go. The other thing to look for are these covers. This cover is a spring plate, and it pushes the servo away, the plate away from the lining, and this should be pushed out. You can see that movement there, and that should do that naturally. So we'll need to change this cover. The lining on this, we might just try and flat. It's in good shape, it's dry, and we'll see what we're going to do with that. So what we need to do is undo these 2 nuts, these locking nuts there. We take 2 15/16 wrenches. That off there. Two nuts and a washer. Then this will come off. Now this is interesting because this is made up of a spring, and underneath there you can see there's 3 balls and 3 runners. As the levers go up, it spreads it apart, which puts the pressure on the plate that hits the lining, and that causes that to react. The peg there pulls on either one of the arms by rotating once the two levers bring the pressure to bear there, and that's what gives you your power assistance. I'm going to take this all down, take it all apart. Just a little bit of leverage to get the bearing off. Normally they fall apart quite easily, but everything on this is a little tight. It was time to overhaul it. When these cars were running every day, the servo would probably need overhauling about every 2 years, 24,000 miles you would expect to do it. Cars are a bit of a leaker, then you might have to do it more frequently if oil gets onto the lining. That's the biggest problem with these, is the oil getting on them. So we have a bearing in there that we'll clean up and reuse, like so. We have another lever, or a lever there. And inside there's a washer there that you'll need to remember goes there. The other lever will come up, and you can see that this has been beaten and wrapped around and damaged this rubber holder, so we'll fix that up before we put it together. The servo suffered a little bit of pushing and shoving by the feel of it. Everything's a little tight. But there's another bearing in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over and tap this bearing surface out, because there's a felt in there. So we'll take our punch and just carefully see that's moved already. Spin that around, keep it even. That's no big deal, but just to show you that there's a felt and a cup inside there. So we've fully stripped this servo now, so we'll keep this lining dry and we'll flat that on a piece of emery cloth and see what we've got. We'll make a decision about that when we're ready to put it back together. And that's the servo stripped. We've got a number of servo plates here. This is to demonstrate the differences that you may very well come across with your car. This is the plate that came off the car. You can see it has a single slot and it is worn somewhat around. This one's a flatted plate, which just CAD plated and demonstrates the single slot. This one has many slots all the way around. Almost every inch it has a slot. This was done by Rolls-Royce at the factory with the intention of letting the dust out. These servo motors tend to get dusty, and that was thought to be one of the problems with them, that the dust would build up and then cause the friction material not to touch the plate. And the number of grooves allowed the dust to get away from the plate. But either one will work correctly. These ones, once they're flatted, will work just as efficiently. If you have that, stick with it. If you have this, I wouldn't get too excited. I'd just stay with the same. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this plate to the vise and I'm going to demonstrate how to get the plate nice and flat. And it's very important that we keep the file flat when we're doing this. Take a big flat file like that one there, very large. Cut a piece of emery cloth to flat with. You can't file this because it's too hard, so we use an emery cloth, and this is a coarse emery cloth. I'm going to rub until all the marks are coming out. You can just see at this stage here the marks there and there are beginning to come out. The emery cloth wears out very quickly. Don't try and be frugal with it. It's just going to make your life harder. The fresher the thing, the better the cut. When you've gone all around the plate and taken all the marks off, then it's ready to be used again. You can see they're both no marks in either one of them. So these are ready to be used. Now we'll go on to the putting together process, or the rebuilding process of the mechanism.